What kind of woman walks into a silent frontier town and asks a condemned man to marry her, knowing it could get them both killed before sunrise in Blackridge Crossing? No one dared go near the iron cage in the square until she did. She wasn't afraid of the man inside, but everyone else was. And when the chains came off, something far worse than a hanging was set in motion. Because by nightfall, the town wasn't whispering anymore. It was hunting. And the truth they carried was dangerous enough to burn everything down. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. So what really happened that night? Let's step into the story. The late afternoon sun burned low over Blackridge Crossing, turning the entire town the color of rust and dried blood. Heat rose from the cracked earth in wavering sheets, distorting the outlines of buildings that leaned as if they had long since given up standing straight. At the center of the square, where every road seemed to lead and every eye eventually settled, stood the iron cage. It was not built to hold a man. It was built to break one. The bars were thick, blackened from years of use, and now glowed faintly where the sun had baked them all day. The metal carried heat like a brand, and the ground beneath it was scorched bare, as if even weeds refused to grow near it. The cage had no shade, no mercy, and no purpose beyond spectacle. It was a warning. It was punishment before punishment. And by dawn, it would be the prelude to a hanging. Inside sat Caleb Crow Vance. His wrists were shackled in front of him, the iron biting into skin already rubbed raw. His back rested against the bars, his head slightly lowered, but not in defeat. His dark hair hung in uneven strands around his face, shadowing eyes that had not once searched the crowd for pity. Dust clung to his clothes, dried blood marked his sleeves, and yet there was nothing about him that resembled a man begging for life. The townspeople had gathered, but not closely. They stood in a loose ring at a distance, as if the heat of the cage extended farther than it should. No one jeered. No one threw stones. No one spat or shouted curses the way frontier towns usually did when a condemned man was displayed. Instead, there was silence, thick, unnatural silence. They called him a murderer, a beast, a crow that brought death wherever it landed. But they did not come near him, and that silence said more than any accusation ever could. Caleb did not move. Not when a fly crawled across his cheek, not when the wind shifted and dust rolled through the square. He sat as though time itself had slowed around him, as though he had already stepped outside the reach of whatever fate waited at sunrise. Or as though he was waiting. A distant rumble of wheels broke the stillness. Heads turned slowly at first, then all at once toward the edge of the square. A carriage wrong for this place, wrong for this dust-choked town, rolled to a stop where the packed dirt met the worn boards of the main street. The door opened. Lady Eliza Whitmore stepped down. She did not belong to Blackridge Crossing. That much was clear before she took a second step. Her travel dress, though marked by dust from the road, still carried the cut and stitching of somewhere far more refined. Pale gloves covered her hands. A hat cast a soft shadow over her face, but not enough to hide the sharpness in her gaze. She did not hesitate. She looked once at the buildings, once at the gathered crowd, and then her attention settled on the iron cage. On him. She did not ask anyone his name. She did not need to. That alone stirred something uneasy in the people watching her. A few exchanged glances. Someone muttered under their breath. Sheriff Martin Hale, standing near the steps of his office, straightened slightly, his attention snapping toward her with immediate irritation. From the balcony of the bank, Edgar Halbrook leaned against the railing, one hand resting lightly on polished wood, his expression unreadable. He studied her, not as a curiosity, but as a calculation. Eliza stepped off the boardwalk and onto the open ground of the square. The dust shifted under her boots, rising in soft clouds with each step. The crowd began to move not toward her, but away, creating space, widening the circle around the cage. Without a word spoken, no one reached for her. No one tried to stop her. They simply let her walk. A woman near the bakery doorway whispered, "Miss, you don't want to go near him." Eliza did not even turn her head. A man stepped back so quickly he nearly stumbled, as if proximity alone might make him part of whatever was about to happen. The space around the cage felt like a boundary, invisible but understood. Everyone in Blackridge knew where it began, and she crossed it without slowing. The heat hit her first. It radiated from the iron in heavy waves, pressing against her skin. She moved closer still, until she stood just beyond arm's reach of the bars. Only then did Caleb lift his head. Their eyes met. She had expected something feral, something broken, something wild enough to justify the way this town treated him. Instead, she saw exhaustion, pain, and beneath both, something unyielding, something that had not been broken. Eliza raised her hand and wrapped her fingers around one of the iron bars. The heat bit instantly sharp and punishing. Her skin protested, but she did not pull away. The gesture was deliberate, visible. Caleb's gaze flicked to her hand, then back to her face. He understood. She wanted them all to see that she was not afraid. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady. "Marry me." The words cut through the square like a shot. No one laughed. No one even breathed, it seemed. Sheriff Hale froze mid-step. Judge Silas Avery, half hidden in the doorway of the saloon, turned fully around, blinking, as if unsure he had heard correctly. Up on the balcony, Halbrook's eyes narrowed just slightly. Caleb did not react the way they expected either. He did not bark a laugh, did not spit at her, did not call her mad. He studied her. For a long moment he said nothing at all. Then quietly, "Why me, Eliza?" did not hesitate. "Because you're the only one they haven't broken." Something shifted in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. She knew something. More than she should. Sheriff Hale finally found his voice. "Miss, I suggest you step away from that cage. That man is condemned. He's dangerous, and he's already been judged." Eliza did not turn. "Has he?" she asked. "Has he stood before a proper hearing? Or did this town decide his guilt in the same way it decides everything else?" Hale's jaw tightened. "Out here we don't have time for Eastern formalities." "Then you have time for injustice," Eliza replied evenly. She released the bar and reached into her satchel, pulling out a bundle of notes, more money than most in that square would see in a year. "I am invoking federal law regarding the custody of a condemned prisoner prior to execution," she said. "A legal spouse may assume responsibility under bond pending review." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hale stared at the money, then at her. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. "Judge Avery," she called without looking away from the cage. "I believe you are still capable of recognizing a lawful bond." The judge hesitated, glancing between Hale and Halbrook. Halbrook did not move. That more than anything forced the decision. "If the bond is sufficient?" Avery muttered, stepping forward, already reaching for the worn Bible tucked beneath his arm. Hale swore under his breath, but did not stop him. The ceremony was rushed, stripped to its bones. Eliza slipped her hand through the bars again. Caleb watched it for a moment, then slowly took it. His grip was rough, calloused, but controlled. "You're making a mistake," he murmured low enough that only she could hear. "I already have," she answered. "Now I'm choosing the one that matters." The judge spoke the words, voice unsteady. "Do you take this man?" I do, Eliza said before he could finish. A pause. Caleb looked at her, searching her face for something: fear, doubt, hesitation. He found none. I do, he said. No one applauded. No one spoke. The silence that followed felt heavier than the cage itself. Eliza placed the money into the judge's hands. Sheriff Hale stood rigid for a moment, then jerked his chin at a deputy. Open it. The key scraped in the lock. The iron door groaned as it swung open. Caleb stepped out. Up close, he seemed larger. Not just in size, but in presence. The absence of the bars made something in the crowd recoil. Several people took involuntary steps back. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet his gaze. Caleb looked at them all. He took in their faces one by one, as if committing them to memory. No one looked surprised. That was the first thing that set him on edge. No one shouted. No one protested. And Holbrook still hadn't moved. Eliza felt it too, though she did not say it aloud. They turned and walked away together. Why did Eliza choose to save Caleb, the one man everyone else feared? Was it just desperation? Or did she see something no one else dared to look at? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to subscribe before we dive into the most intense part of the story. The carriage rolled out of Blackridge Crossing just as the last light of day began to sink behind the jagged line of distant hills. The wooden wheels groaned softly over packed dirt, the sound unnaturally loud in the absence of everything else. No voices followed them. No shouted orders from Sheriff Hale. No pounding hooves from a posse sent in pursuit. No curses hurled from doorways or boardwalks. Behind them, the town simply stopped. Eliza kept her eyes forward, her posture rigid, her hands steady on the reins, but her grip had tightened enough to pale her knuckles beneath the gloves. The silence pressed against her from all sides, heavier than any threat she had expected. Beside her, Caleb said nothing. He sat with one arm resting loosely on his knee. But nothing about him was relaxed. His gaze moved constantly left, right over the ridge lines, across the open stretches of scrub and stone. He watched the land the way a man watched something alive. Something hunting. After a while, Eliza spoke. They're not following. No, Caleb said quietly. They're not. That doesn't trouble you. It should trouble you more than it does. She didn't respond immediately. The carriage continued forward, the road stretching out in a pale ribbon ahead of them. Caleb leaned slightly, studying the dirt. No fresh tracks, he murmured. No crossing prints. No wagon wheels cutting through from either side. Eliza frowned. Is that unusual for a place like this? He shook his head. It's wrong. He lifted his eyes to the horizon, then higher. The sky was empty. Not a single bird cut across it. Even the wind seemed to move without touching anything. The dry grass on either side of the road should have shifted, whispered bent. Instead, it stood stiff, unmoving, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Caleb exhaled slowly. We're being watched. Eliza's hands tightened slightly on the reins. If that's true, why hasn't anyone made a move? He glanced at her, then his expression unreadable. Because men who plan don't waste the first shot. Not until they know what their prey is carrying. The words settled between them, cold and precise. Eliza stared ahead, the realization taking hold with quiet force. The marriage, the escape from the cage, none of it had ended anything. It had only begun. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Caleb said without looking at her, "You knew my name before you ever stepped into that square." Eliza did not answer. "You knew what they called me, what they said I'd done. And you still walked straight to that cage." His voice lowered. "So I'll ask you once more, Mrs. Vance. What exactly did you come here for?" She let out a slow breath, When she spoke, her voice had changed. Not softer, but more deliberate. I didn't come to Blackridge Crossing by accident. Caleb gave a small, humorless smile. That much I figured. I've been following a trail for months, she continued. Land deeds, missing filings, discrepancies in ownership that didn't align with the number of people still living on those lands. Names that appeared and then vanished. He turned his head slightly, listening now. A man from a federal office wrote to me, she said. One letter. It never reached its destination. I found it in a dead file stack in Cheyenne. He mentioned this town and one name. Mine. She nodded. He said if anyone knew what was happening here, it would be the man the town wanted dead the fastest. Caleb let out a quiet breath. So you didn't marry a condemned man to save him? No. You married him to use him. Eliza didn't flinch. I married him because without him the truth dies with the rest of them. For a moment the only sound was the creak of the carriage. Then Caleb nodded once. Fair enough. She reached into the inner lining of her coat and pulled out a tightly wrapped oilskin packet. She did not hand it to him, but she loosened the edge enough for him to see. Papers, names, marks, copies, she said. Land transfers, witness statements that were never filed, records that don't match the official ledger. They all lead back to one man. Halbrook. Yes. Caleb looked away, his jaw tightening. And you think paper like that will stop him? I think paper like this combined with a living witness might. He gave a low, dry laugh. Then you're going to need me alive a little longer than sunrise. That was always the plan. The road dipped suddenly. Caleb's attention snapped forward. Slow down, he said. Eliza eased the reins, the carriage rolling into a shallow basin between two low ridges of stone and scrub. The shadows stretched long here, cutting the road into bands of light and darkness. Caleb leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Don't stop, he added quickly. Just slow. Eliza felt the shift before she fully understood it. The air seemed thicker, the sound of the wheels louder, every movement amplified. What is it? She asked. Bad ground, Caleb said. High sides, narrow path, blind turn ahead. He gestured subtly toward a cluster of brush on the ridge. See that branch, he murmured. Eliza squinted. It looked broken. The wind's coming from the west, Caleb said. That branch fell east. A faint line of dust lifted and vanished just beyond it. Someone's up there. Her breath caught. How many? At least 4, he said. Maybe more. And they haven't fired. Not yet. The first shot came a heartbeat later. Crack! The bullet struck the dirt just ahead of the horses, kicking up a burst of dust that made them rear and scream. Eliza fought the reins, hauling them back. Easy, easy. A second shot slammed into the rear wheel, splintering wood, but not breaking it. Caleb's expression hardened instantly. They're not trying to kill us. What they're steering us. Steering left is closed, he snapped. Don't take the bend. Another volley came sharp and controlled, striking just to their left. Instinct forced Eliza to turn the carriage right. A narrow, half-forgotten trail cut off from the main road into a rocky stretch of dry terrain. Caleb swore under his breath. That's exactly where they want us. I can turn back. No, you can't. He jerked his head toward the ridge behind them. They've already locked it. A figure flickered into view above, then vanished. Caleb reached beneath the seat and pulled free a revolver, checking the cylinder with quick, practiced hands. Keep moving, he said. I'll buy us space. He fired once, not at a man, but at the edge of the ridge. Dirt exploded upward, forcing the hidden shooter to duck. The carriage jolted violently as it hit the uneven trail wheels, slamming over rock and hardened earth. Eliza fought to keep control, the entire frame shuddering beneath her. Another shot tore through the back panel of the carriage. The oilskin packet slipped from her grip and fell. She lunged for it instinctively. Caleb saw, and in that instant he understood. "That's what they want," he said. Before she could answer, he grabbed her arm. Now he leapt from the carriage, pulling her with him. They hit the ground hard, rolling into a narrow depression beside a jagged outcrop of stone. Behind them, the horses bolted forward, dragging the empty carriage deeper into the pass. Gunfire followed it. The attackers for a moment believed their prey was still inside. Caleb pressed Eliza flat against the rock, one hand clamped over her mouth as footsteps crunched above them. They passed close. Too close. Eliza felt the weight of it, then truly felt it. This was no longer something she controlled with law or leverage. This was survival. When the sounds moved on, Caleb did not let her rise immediately. He listened, counted, measured the silence. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "This isn't an ambush." Eliza swallowed. "Then what is it? A drive?" He picked up a handful of dust, letting it fall slowly through his fingers. "They shoot too clean," he continued. "Too precise. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. If they wanted us captured, they'd have blocked the trail." He looked toward the jagged terrain ahead. "They're pushing us somewhere." Eliza felt a chill run through her. Into a place they've already chosen. Caleb nodded once. "Exactly." She stared into the darkness of the rocks, the realization settling in. They hadn't escaped Blackridge Crossing. They had been released into the next part of it. And somewhere ahead in the deepening night, something was waiting. Caleb saw it before Eliza did, the faint, jagged outline of a structure rising out of the darkness ahead, barely distinguishable from the broken land around it. "A cabin," he said under his breath. "Might buy us a few minutes." Eliza followed his gaze, but before she could answer, she glanced back over her shoulder. Far along the ridge, they had crossed a single flicker of orange light, moved then another. Torches. "They're still coming," she whispered. They never stopped. They moved toward the cabin without another word, cutting across the open ground instead of following any visible path. Caleb adjusted his steps carefully, choosing stone over dust, harder ground over loose earth. Every movement was deliberate, calculated to leave as little trace as possible. Eliza tried to follow his pattern, though her boots were not made for this terrain. Her dress caught on thorn and rock, her gloves tore at the fingertips, but she said nothing. The urgency had burned hesitation out of her. The cabin stood alone in a patch of barren land, far from any road or fence line. No corral, no sign of livestock, no life. The wood had long since lost its color, bleached pale by years of sun. The roof sagged slightly at one corner. The front door hung half open, swaying just enough to creak faintly in the night air. Caleb stopped her with a hand to her arm before she could step inside. "Wait." He crouched, scanning the ground around the entrance. His fingers brushed lightly over the dirt, over faint indentations that had long since lost their edges. "No fresh tracks," he murmured. "Nothing recent," but his eyes moved to the doorframe. There, caught on a rusted nail, was a strip of fabric. He reached up, pulling it free. The cloth was brittle, frayed to threads, but the faded blue-gray dye was still visible. Eliza leaned closer. "That color, that's Federal Courier issue." Caleb nodded once, or what's left of one. They exchanged a look. Then, without another word, they stepped inside. The air hit them first thick with dust, old ash, and the faint sour trace of something long gone. The smell of abandonment, of decay that had already finished its work. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the warped walls, casting thin, pale beams across the interior. It illuminated chaos. Furniture lay overturned. A table split down the middle. A cupboard hung crooked from one hinge. Plates and broken glass littered the floor, crunching softly underfoot. And on the walls, bullet holes, dozens of them. Caleb moved closer, tracing the patterns with his eyes. "Not random," he said quietly. He stepped to one side, then another, aligning angles. Shots came through the front door and the side window. He gestured. Crossfire. Eliza's gaze followed his. They were surrounded. Not robbed, Caleb added. Executed. Her breath caught. Near the fireplace, a dark stain spread across the wooden floorboards, blackened with time soaked so deep it had become part of the grain. Eliza crouched beside it, her gloved fingers hovering but not touching. "Blood," she said softly. A small chair lay tipped near the corner, its legs splintered. She stared at it for a long moment. There was a family here. Caleb didn't answer, but his face had hardened. He stepped slowly through the room, his boots avoiding the larger debris, his attention shifting to the structure itself. "This place sits off the old route," he said. "Path that used to run toward the North Ridge, toward the claims." Eliza turned toward the fireplace. Inside, beneath layers of ash, something caught her eye. She reached in, pulling free a handful of charred paper fragments. Most were useless, burned beyond recognition. But some still held faint ink. Lot number, West Tract, filed under office seal. She gathered what she could, folding them carefully despite their fragility. Caleb watched her. "Anything left behind here," he said, "could be bait." Eliza met his gaze. Or it could be truth no one expected to be found. He didn't argue. Instead, he moved toward the far wall. Near the bed, if it could still be called that, something felt off. The floorboards didn't sit quite right. One plank sat slightly higher than the rest. Caleb knelt, pulling a knife from his belt. He wedged it into the seam and pried. The board lifted with a dull crack. Beneath it, an empty space. And inside that space, wrapped tightly in oilcloth, was a small ledger. Eliza's pulse quickened as she took it. The cover was worn but intact. She opened it carefully. Inside, neat, precise lines filled the pages. Dates, names, numbers. At first glance, it looked like a transaction log. Land sold, payments received, parcels transferred. But as she read, further patterns emerged. Certain names were marked. Subtle notations beside them, small symbols almost invisible unless you knew to look. Her breath slowed. "I've seen these names before," she said. She pulled one of her own documents free, comparing. They matched the missing persons list. Caleb leaned closer. "Look at this," she continued. "Relocated east." She flipped a page. "Accidental fall. No remaining claim." Her voice tightened. "They're not records of land sales. They're records of removals." Caleb scanned the entries, then stopped. His jaw clenched. "I knew 2 of these men," he said quietly. "Hired me once. Said they struck a vein up north." He tapped the page. "They never left." Eliza closed the book slowly. "This isn't one crime," she said. "It's a system." Caleb nodded. "And Holbrook's at the center of it." She looked down at the ledger in her hands. "This proves everything." "And makes us worth a lot more dead," Caleb replied. Silence settled between them. Then Eliza stood. "We have to get this out," she said, "to someone who can act on it. A federal marshal, Thomas Rourke. I've heard he's already in the territory." Caleb's expression didn't change. "You're counting on a man you've never met," he said. "I'm counting on someone not owned by this town." He shook his head slightly. If he's already been here, already spoken to Halbrook, then he's heard their version first. That doesn't mean he'll believe it. It means he'll have a reason to doubt us. Eliza stepped closer. The law isn't blind. No, Caleb said, but the man holding it can be pointed in the wrong direction. That stopped her. For the first time since leaving the town, uncertainty crept into her expression. Caleb exhaled slowly. There's no clean way out of here, he said. Every road's watched, every stop's known. You ride far enough, word reaches ahead of you. He gestured vaguely toward the dark beyond the cabin. Blackridge isn't just a town. It's a net. Eliza looked down at the ledger again. So we run and we're hunted, she said. We hide and we're found. We wait and they come for us anyway. Caleb said nothing. She lowered herself onto the broken edge of the table, the wood creaking beneath her weight. For a moment, she simply stared at the blood-stained floor. Then she spoke again, more quietly. If we die out there, she said, they'll call it an accident. Caleb didn't interrupt. If we disappear, they'll say you ran, that I followed you. She lifted her gaze. And if we arrive too late, Rourke may already have signed off on their version of the truth. Caleb watched her carefully. Then what are you suggesting? She stood. We don't run. His brow furrowed. That's not courage. That's suicide. No, she said. It's control. She stepped closer, her voice gaining strength. This, she held up the ledger as names. Evidence. Your testimony is the rest. Separately, they can be dismissed. Together, they can't be buried. They can be killed, Caleb said flatly. Only if they stay hidden, she countered. We bring it into the open. In front of Rourke, in front of the town. He stared at her. You want to walk back into Blackridge? I want to force them to deny it, where they can't do it quietly. Caleb shook his head. You don't understand what Halbrook will do if he's cornered. Eliza met his gaze unwavering. I understand exactly what he'll do. That's why we don't give him time. A long silence followed. Then Caleb let out a slow breath. You're stubborn, he said. I have to be. He studied her for another moment, then nodded. Then we go back. They left the cabin before the torches reached it. Caleb led them along a dry creek bed, stepping in stone channels where footprints wouldn't hold. They passed a broken fence line, a cluster of weathered graves, marked only by leaning boards. Eliza tucked the ledger deep inside her coat. The remaining papers she divided, hiding them in separate folds. If I go down, Caleb said quietly, you don't stop. She shot him a sharp look. You're not dying tonight. That's not your call. Neither is giving up, she snapped. He didn't argue further. Ahead, the outline of Blackridge Crossing emerged from the dark. No lights, no sound. The town sat like a shadow, carved into the earth. They're waiting, Caleb said. I know, Eliza replied. They walked into it anyway. The street was empty. Windows shuttered. Doors closed. Curtains shifted faintly, but no faces appeared. The iron cage still stood in the center of the square. Open. Waiting. Eliza stepped forward. One step, then another. Caleb moved slightly ahead of her, positioning himself, just off-center, eyes scanning every rooftop, every balcony, every angle of fire. He felt it before he saw it. Guns. Dozens of them. Hidden but there. Then a light flickered to life. High on the bank balcony, another in the saloon, another in the general store. One by one, the town lit itself, not in welcome, but in exposure. Figures emerged on rooftops behind crates and doorways. Sheriff Hale stepped out from the shadows. Caleb shifted slightly, pulling Eliza just out of the direct line of the open street. But she didn't step back. She stood her ground. "This is it," he said under his breath. "I know." The lights steadied. The guns did not waver. And in that moment, surrounded on all sides with nowhere left to run, they understood. There was no outside, and there was no escape. Edgar Halbrook stepped forward from the bank as if he had been waiting for his cue. He adjusted his coat with a measured calm. Brushing invisible dust from the sleeve, his posture composed his expression, untouched by surprise. The glow of the oil lamps cast long shadows behind him, framing him not as a man caught off guard, but as one who had been expecting this exact moment. "I wondered how long it would take," he said, his voice carrying easily across the square. "You were never going to run, were you, Miss Whitmore?" Eliza said nothing. Halbrook's lips curved faintly. "No. You're not the running kind. Too proud for that. Too convinced that truth has weight in a place like this." He took another step forward, eyes shifting briefly toward Caleb. "And you?" he added. "I knew you wouldn't make it far. Not with something worth killing over in your hands." Caleb didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't raise it either. His stance shifted slightly, positioning himself just enough to intercept any line of fire aimed at Eliza. Halbrook gestured lazily toward the surrounding buildings. The pursuit, he continued, the pressure, the noise in the dark. All of it was never meant to end you. He tilted his head. It was meant to bring you back. Eliza's gaze hardened. "You wanted us here," she said. "I needed you here," Halbrook corrected. "Out there you could disappear, die in a canyon, be swallowed by the land. And then, what would I have?" He spread his hands. "Nothing. No story. No proof of your desperation." Caleb's jaw tightened. "So you staged the hunt?" Halbrook smiled faintly. "I shaped it." His eyes returned to Eliza. "You were tired, pressed, forced to think quickly instead of carefully. Exactly as I intended." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Now," he said quietly, "we can resolve this cleanly." The air tightened. "Hand over the documents," Halbrook continued, his tone smoothing into something almost reasonable. "And I will allow you to leave this town alive. You have my word." A flicker of tension passed through the men around him. "And him?" Eliza asked. Halbrook didn't hesitate. "He still hangs." Caleb gave a low breath that might have been a laugh. "Of course I do." Eliza stepped forward. "No," she said. The word cut cleanly through the square. She moved toward the iron cage, stepping onto the low wooden platform beside it, so that every eye in the town could see her clearly. "You don't want these papers because they're false," she said, her voice steady. "You want them because they're true." A ripple moved through the crowd. Halbrook's smile thinned. "You misunderstand the nature of this place, Miss Whitmore." "And you misunderstand me," she replied. He gave a small dismissive tilt of his head. "A foreign lady far from home, caught up in matters she cannot possibly comprehend." Eliza's gaze swept the crowd. "If these documents were meaningless," she said louder now, "why would an entire town need to point guns at them? Silence." Behind her, Caleb's eyes tracked every rooftop, every shifting shadow, every barrel angled from above. Sheriff Hale stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That's enough. You'll keep your mouth shut or you'll what Eliza cut in." She began to speak names. One after another. Men who had disappeared. Families who had vanished. Each name fell into the square like a stone dropped into still water. And with each one, something changed. A man near the general store lowered his gaze. A woman at a window drew her curtain tighter, but not fast enough to hide her expression. A murmur started, then died just as quickly. Halbrook watched it happen, and for the first time, something like tension touched his face. Then the sound of approaching hooves broke the moment. All heads turned. From the northern road, a small group of riders emerged, their silhouettes cutting through the low light. At their center rode a man in a long coat posture, rigid presence unmistakable. Marshal Thomas Rourke. He reined in at the edge of the square, his eyes sweeping the scene in a single controlled motion. "What in God's name is happening here?" he demanded. No one answered immediately. Then Holbrook stepped forward, his tone shifting seamlessly into polite authority. "Marshal," he said, inclining his head, "you arrive at an unfortunate moment. We have a situation involving a condemned man who has escaped lawful custody, aided by this woman, Eliza Whitmore," she said sharply. Holbrook continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Who has stirred unrest, interfered with the sentence, and now threatens violence." Sheriff Hale stepped up beside him. "The man is dangerous. Killed before, will again." Rourke didn't move. His gaze shifted to Eliza, then to Caleb, then to the guns pointed in every direction. "Lower your weapons," he said. A few did. Most did not. The square split silently into three sides. Holbrook and Hale with the town's muscle, Eliza and Caleb standing exposed in the center, and Rourke caught between them. Caleb leaned slightly toward Eliza. "One wrong move," he murmured, "and this turns into a slaughter." "I know," she whispered. Then she stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, she reached inside her coat and pulled out the documents. "Marshal," she said, her voice clear, "you're looking at evidence of fraud, murder, and land theft spanning years. Signed, filed, hidden." She laid the papers on a nearby crate. Then she pulled the ledger free. "This," she said, "is their record." Rourke stepped closer, taking in the pages, the names, the markings. His expression changed subtly, but unmistakably. "I've seen some of these names," he said. "Missing persons, unresolved." Caleb stepped forward. "I led Holbrook to the North Valley," he said. "Watched his men bury bodies by the creek. Killed 2 of them when they tried to do the same to me." Holbrook laughed lightly. "A convenient story from a man facing a noose." Hale added, "You expect us to take his word over the law." Eliza's voice cut through again. "If he's lying," she said, "why were we hunted the moment we left your town?" That stopped something. A hesitation. Then a voice from the edge of the square. Old Ben Carter stepped forward, his movements slow but determined. "I saw it," he said. All eyes turned. "I saw Hale bring a courier into his office." Ben continued, his voice shaking. "Man wore federal colors. Never came out again." Hale's face went dark. "You keep your mouth shut, Ben." But the order came too fast, too sharp, and people heard it. The young deputy shifted, glancing between Hale and Rourke. "There's graves," he said quietly. "Out by the dry creek, no markers." The silence cracked, not shattered, but fractured. Holbrook saw it, and so did Hale. The sheriff's hand moved before anyone could stop him. He drew and fired. The shot tore past Ben's shoulder, but Caleb moved faster. He slammed into the old man, driving him to the ground as the bullets splintered wood behind them. And then everything broke. Gunfire exploded from the rooftops. Rourke's men fired back. Glass shattered, wood splintered, horses screamed. Caleb rolled, coming up behind the iron cage, using its thick bars as cover. He fired once, clean controlled. A man dropped from a balcony. Eliza didn't freeze. She grabbed the fallen deputy's rifle, swung it upward, and fired not at a man, but at a hanging lantern. The glass shattered. Darkness swallowed half the square. A shooter above cursed, his aim broken. Around them chaos surged. Some townsfolk dropped their weapons, scrambling for cover. Others, those tied too deeply to Holbrook, kept firing. Hale circled, trying to flank Caleb. Eliza saw him first. Behind you. Caleb turned just in time, the shot grazing past where his head had been. They faced each other across the smoke. 2 shots, one fell. Hale hit the ground beside the cage. And in that instant, Halbrook ran. The composure vanished. The control snapped. He turned toward the bank, toward the horse, waiting in the shadows, but old Ben stepped into his path. Not strong enough to stop him. Just enough to slow him. Rourke's men closed in. Caleb raised his gun. "Don't," he said. Halbrook froze, and the moment ended. Rourke stepped forward, voice cutting through the remaining gunfire. "That's enough. Stand down, one by one, weapons lowered." Halbrook was seized. Hale lay still. The square fell quiet again, but this time it was not the same silence. This one was broken. Rourke turned, issuing orders rapidly. "Secure the prisoners. Gather the documents. Send riders to the creek, the cabin, every location mentioned." He looked at Caleb. "The execution is suspended. Not absolution. Not yet. But not death." Dawn began to rise. Light spilled slowly over the rooftops, cutting through the smoke, illuminating the iron cage at the center of it all, now scarred, blood-stained, empty. The townspeople stood scattered, no longer a unified front, no longer silent in the same way. Halbrook was led through the square he once controlled. No one spoke for him. Eliza stood still, the last of the documents clutched in her hand. Beside her, Caleb leaned, slightly blood at his side, exhaustion etched deep but standing. Free. Neither of them moved to leave. Behind them, the cage door hung open. For the first time, Blackridge Crossing had nothing left to hide behind, and nothing left to say. 3 months after the gun smoke cleared from Blackridge Crossing, the town began to move again. Wagons rolled through the main street. The blacksmith's hammer rang in the mornings. The saloon opened before noon, just as it always had. Women hung laundry behind narrow houses, merchants swept dust from their porches, and men still gathered near the feed store to talk in low voices over tobacco and stale coffee. From a distance, Blackridge looked alive, but it was not the same. The bank stood closed, its brass sign darkened by weather and neglect. The windows that once reflected Edgar Halbrook's power were covered with boards. No one lingered in front of it. No one spoke his name unless they had to. People walked past the building with their eyes lowered, as if even an empty bank could still hear them. The iron cage had been removed from the square, but its shape remained in the town's memory. There was a pale scar in the dirt where it had stood, a square of ground no wagon wheel seemed willing to cross. Eliza noticed that first. She noticed everything now. She noticed how conversations stopped when she entered the general store. She noticed how some people tipped their hats with forced politeness, while others looked at her as though she had brought ruin instead of truth. She noticed how Caleb could not walk down the street without hands drifting toward holsters. No one called him Crow to his face anymore, but they still said it when he passed. They said it softly behind windows, behind doors, behind the safety of distance. Caleb never reacted. He had learned long ago that names could be traps if a man turned toward them every time they were thrown. Eliza reacted enough for both of them. "They still hate you," she said one evening, as they stood outside the old marshal's office, waiting for word from Cheyenne. Caleb looked across the street where 2 men had stopped talking the moment he glanced their way. "No," he said. "They hate that I'm still breathing." Halbrook was in custody, but he had not been convicted. That was the part Eliza had not expected to feel like defeat. She had believed that once the evidence was gathered, once the ledger was secured, once Marshal Thomas Rourke had sent men to the dry creek and found the unmarked graves, justice would move like a clean blade through rotten cloth. Instead, justice moved slowly. It limped. Lawyers came from the east in coats too fine for frontier dust. They spoke in careful words. They questioned signatures. They challenged dates. They asked whether a blood-stained ledger found in an abandoned cabin could truly be trusted. They suggested that Caleb, a known killer in the eyes of local record, had reason to invent stories. They implied that Eliza, a foreign-born aristocrat with political connections and strange ambitions, had manipulated a violent man for personal gain. One file disappeared between Blackridge and Cheyenne. Another arrived with pages missing. A witness who had agreed to testify changed his statement after his barn burned. A woman who had seen Sheriff Hale's riders drag a courier into the jail packed her children into a wagon and vanished before sunrise. Old Ben Carter, who had stood in the square and cracked the town's silence, refused to leave Blackridge. He sat outside his store every day with a shotgun across his knees and a Bible on the table beside him. "They're still reaching," he told Eliza one morning. "A man like Halbrook don't grow that tall without roots under him." Eliza understood what he meant. Halbrook had been powerful, yes, but he had not been alone. For the first time in her life, she began to doubt the things she had trusted most, not truth itself, but the machinery meant to protect it. She had been raised to believe in documents, seals, signatures, witness statements, courtrooms, procedure. She believed civilization was built on the idea that facts once placed in proper order could defeat lies. But Blackridge taught her something crueler. Papers could be altered. Witnesses could be bought. Judges could delay. Men could die before speaking. And the truth, if left alone, could be buried under perfectly legal dirt. One evening after another, hearing was postponed, Isa stood outside the closed bank and stared at the boards over the windows. "I thought evidence would be enough," she said. Caleb stood beside her, his hat pulled low, his face shadowed. "It never is." She turned to him. "Then what is—" He looked toward the empty square. "Someone stubborn enough to keep holding it when everyone else wants to let go." The words stayed with her. Truth needed more than proof. It needed guardians. By then, her marriage to Caleb had changed into something neither of them quite knew how to name. It was no longer a legal trick, no longer merely a bond drawn in desperation through iron bars. They had survived too much for that. She knew the sound of his footsteps in the dark. He knew when her silence meant fear and when it meant calculation. She had learned to clean wounds, load a rifle, and sleep lightly. He had learned that she could be fragile in appearance and still more relentless than any gunman he had known. But closeness did not mean peace. Caleb did not trust institutions. Not courts, not marshals, not offices with flags above them. To him, justice was a thing men used as a word when they wanted to hide the knife in their hand. Eliza still wanted to fight from inside the law. Caleb wanted to survive long enough to punish the men outside it. Those two paths often ran side by side, but not always. The first real sign that Halbrook was only part of something larger came in the form of a missing document. It was one of the land transfer sheets Eliza had carried from the beginning. A copy had been placed in federal custody. Then it vanished. 2 weeks later, it appeared again in the file, same seal, same paper, same general form. But the names were wrong. A dead man's signature had been replaced. A witness line had been removed. A parcel number now pointed away from the North Valley and toward worthless scrubland. Rourke saw it too. He came to Eliza and Caleb after sunset, his face colder than she had ever seen it. "This wasn't done by Halbrook," he said. Caleb leaned against the wall. "No." Rourke placed the altered paper on the table. "Someone had access after it left my hands." Eliza looked at the forged page. Who Rourke hesitated just long enough for her to understand that the answer frightened him. A railroad investment group out of St. Louis, he said. Backed by men with friends in territorial government. Caleb's expression did not change. Eliza's did. The railroad, she said quietly. Rourke nodded. Halbrook wasn't building an empire for himself. He was clearing land for something bigger. The room seemed to shrink. All at once, the deaths around Blackridge were no longer only about gold claims and greed. They were about rail lines, mineral rights, water access, political favors. Halbrook had not been the monster at the center of the web. He had been the hand that worked one corner of it. The proof came too late for one man. The deputy who had lowered his gun in the square and spoken of graves by the Dries Creek agreed to give a full statement. His name was Matthew Lyle. He was young, terrified, and ashamed enough to tell the truth. They found him 2 nights before he was supposed to testify. He was alive when Caleb and Eliza reached him, but barely. Blood darkened the front of his shirt. His fingers clawed weakly at Caleb's sleeve. "They're not done with you," Matthew whispered. Eliza knelt beside him, trying to press cloth to the wound. "Who?" she asked. "Who sent them?" His eyes moved toward the dark, beyond the lamplight. "They're just getting started." Then his hand went slack. After that, Blackridge was no longer safe. Perhaps it never had been. Within a week, Eliza and Caleb left under false names, taking only what they could carry and what evidence they could hide in separate places. They did not travel in straight lines. They avoided major roads. They slept in barns, abandoned line shacks, dry washes, and once beneath a collapsed bridge, while riders passed overhead. Eliza Whitmore, who had once arrived in Blackridge in a fine traveling dress and pale gloves, disappeared piece by piece across the territory. The gloves went first, then the hat, then the dresses replaced by split riding skirts, wool shirts, a weathered coat, and boots that could survive mudstone and blood. Caleb taught her how to move at night without showing herself against the horizon, how to cross hard ground when she wanted to leave no print, how to listen for silence that meant danger, how to sleep with a pistol near her hand and wake without making a sound. She learned. Quickly. Too quickly, Caleb sometimes thought. The men hunting them were not like Hale's riders. They were not loud, drunk deputies or local gunmen with more pride than discipline. These men were patient. They did not always attack. Sometimes they let Caleb and Eliza see just enough to know they were near. A horse track where none should be. A cigarette still warm in the ash. A hotel clerk suddenly too curious. A telegraph operator who remembered their faces after claiming not to. "They want the rest of it," Eliza said one night as they watched a town from the safety of a ridge. "They want all of it," Caleb replied. "Every copy, every name, everyone who touched it. And then us." He did not answer. He did not have to. The first time Eliza killed a man, it was not clean. It happened outside a way station near the Platte during rain so hard it turned the road to black mud. They had stopped only long enough to water the horses. Caleb was inside the stable when a man approached Eliza from behind the feed shed. He did not raise his gun at first. That was what made it worse. He smiled, called her by the false name she had given 2 towns back. Then he said her real one, Lady Whitmore. His hand moved. Eliza fired before she thought. The shot struck him in the chest. He fell against the shed wall and slid down slowly, staring at her with surprise, as if he had never believed a woman like her would pull the trigger first. Caleb came running. By the time he reached her, the man was dead. Eliza stood in the rain, both hands around the pistol, breathing, as though the air had turned to glass in her lungs. "He was going to kill me," she said. Caleb looked at the body, then at her. "Yes." I didn't wait. No. Her face trembled once, then hardened in a way that made Caleb feel a fear he could not name. That night, she did not sleep. Neither did he. Near dawn, Caleb found her cleaning the pistol with hands that no longer shook. "You don't have to become this," he said. She did not look up. Become what someone who survives by losing every part of herself. She snapped the chamber shut. "I am becoming what this world requires." The words cut deeper than she intended. Caleb said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "This world will take everything you give it and still ask for more." She finally looked at him. "And what would you have me do? Stay soft, stay clean. Let men like that decide whether I'm allowed to live. I'd have you live without letting them own what you become." The argument ended there, but the wound remained. For weeks afterward, they moved together with the same efficiency, the same trust in danger, but something new stood between them. Not distance, exactly. More like a question neither could answer. How much could survival change a person before the victory became another kind of defeat? Marshal Rourke found them again in a mining camp south of Laramie. He came alone, which was the only reason Caleb didn't shoot him from the ridge. Rourke looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with travel. "I'm being ordered to close the inquiry," he said. Eliza stared at him. "By whom men whose names don't appear on paper?" Caleb gave a bitter smile. Convenient kind of power. Rourke ignored him. His eyes stayed on Eliza. "They know you're still carrying copies. They know you've been speaking to witnesses. And they know Creed is still alive." "Vance," Caleb said quietly. Rourke glanced at him. "Right. Vance." Eliza crossed her arms. "Are you here to arrest us?" "No." "To stop us," Rourke's silence answered before he did. "I'm here to warn you," he said. "If you keep pushing this, you won't just lose. You'll disappear. Not in a jail, not in a courtroom. You'll vanish so completely that people will start doubting you were ever here." Eliza looked past him toward the low hills turning gold under late afternoon light. "Then we make sure they can't erase us quietly." Rourke let out a tired breath. "You don't know how many there are." "No," she said. "But I know what they are." Caleb watched her then, and something in him settled. He had hoped foolishly, perhaps, that there would be a moment when she chose to walk away. Not because he thought her weak, but because he wanted some part of her old life to remain reachable. But that life was gone. Maybe it had burned away the moment she touched the hot iron bars in Blackridge Square. Maybe earlier. Maybe the truth had been hunting her long before she found him. When Rourke left, Caleb stood beside her in silence. "You understand this won't be easy to win," he said. Eliza looked at him. "I don't think we're doing it because it's easy to win." "Then why?" She turned toward him. "Because if we stop, they get to decide what the truth was." He nodded slowly. That was when the hunt changed. They stopped running simply to live. They began moving together to expose, to connect names that powerful men had tried to keep separate. They met widows who had been told their husbands were drunkards, ranchers who had signed deeds under threat, former clerks who remembered altered ledgers, railroad surveyors who had seen maps before people died along the routes. It took nearly 2 years before the case became too large to bury. By then, Blackridge Crossing was no longer just a frontier town with a bad bank and a corrupt sheriff. It had become a symbol. A federal inquiry opened under pressure from newspapers, rival politicians and families who had spent years being told they're dead had simply vanished into the West. Men who had never feared a local judge now found themselves summoned before committees. Records were pulled from bank vaults, railroad offices, and territorial land bureaus. Names surfaced that Eliza had never heard before, but soon learned to hate. Halbrook testified to save himself. Of course he did. He named men above him, blamed men below him, claimed he had acted under pressure, under threat, under the necessities of expansion. He spoke of progress as if railroads required graves the way engines required coal. Some believed him. Some pretended to. The truth came out, but not cleanly. It never does. There were convictions, a few meaningful ones. Some men went to prison. Some lost office. Some fled before warrants arrived. Others escaped with fines, reduced charges, or carefully worded statements of regret. One railroad investor died suddenly of heart trouble before he could testify. Another moved east and reinvented himself as a respectable businessman. Eliza learned that public truth and justice were not the same thing. One could arrive without the other. Caleb was cleared of Henderson's murder and the charges tied to Holbrook's false case. The execution order was struck down. His name was removed from the official list of condemned men. But paper innocence did not wash the past from a man. Some people still looked at his scars and saw guilt. Some heard that he had killed men and stopped listening before asking why. He was no longer legally a monster, but the world did not know what else to call him. Eliza could have gone home. Letters arrived from people who still remembered Lady Eliza Whitmore as she had been before Blackridge. There was an estate in England where she could recover rooms where no one carried guns, dinners, where people spoke of weather and music instead of land fraud and shallow graves. She read the letters. Then she folded them away. Caleb found her one evening outside the small cabin they had taken near the edge of a valley far from Blackridge. The land was rough, unfinished, honest, in the way hard places can be honest. It promised nothing. It hid nothing. "You could still go," he said. She looked at the horizon. "I know. They'd take you back." "No," she said softly. "They'd take back the woman they remember." He understood. That woman was gone. Not dead exactly, but changed beyond returning. For a long while they stood together without speaking. The world had not become good because they told the truth. Men still lied. Courts still bent. Money still found quiet ways to turn law into shelter for the guilty. Blackridge did not transform into a place of pure justice. No town ever does. But something had survived. Names that were meant to disappear had been spoken aloud. Graves that were meant to stay hidden had been marked. Documents that were meant to rot in silence had reached daylight. And two people who had begun as a bargain through prison bars remained standing after the world tried to grind them down. They were not celebrated heroes. No crowd came to cheer them. No song was written that told it right. They built a small life instead, a real one. A cabin with a repaired roof, 2 horses, a stove that smoked in winter, a table scarred by knives, ink, and old maps. Some nights they still woke at the slightest sound. Some days Eliza would go quiet, remembering rain blood and the first man she had killed. Some days Caleb would ride alone to the ridge and watch the roads until sunset. But when evening came, they returned to the same light, to the same door, to each other. And if anyone ever asked what they had won, Caleb never answered quickly. Eliza usually did. She would look out over the hard land toward the distant line where the sky met the plains and say only this: "They didn't save the world. They just made sure the truth survived it." For me, this story isn't really about justice or even survival. It's about the cost of choosing to see the truth when it would be easier to look away. I see a reminder that courage isn't loud or heroic most of the time. It's quiet, stubborn, and often lonely. What stayed with me is that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a clean ending or a better world, and it just means you refuse to let lies define it. And sometimes, that's the only victory you get. Thank you so much for watching and staying with this story. until the very end. Your support truly means everything. If you enjoyed this journey and want more powerful stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more.